You are now tuned into the Victims Advocate podcast with the Victims Advocate himself, Brandon Stein. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the Victims Advocate podcast with Brandon Stein. I am, of course, Brandon Stein, and I am here with Kristen Jackwin. Kristen, how's it going?
Hi, Brandon. I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me here. It is a true pleasure, and I'm excited for today.
Yeah, good to see you. So I was really anxious to talk to you because in the past couple weeks, I've been following, I'm assuming you have as well, this whole Diddy trial. Now, I know from what I've read, it's set to go 4 to 6 weeks or something crazy like that with all the witnesses.
Yeah.
I want to get into the charges with you because I do have a couple questions just from a criminal defense standpoint, because obviously in your practice, you have experience in state criminal defense as well as federal, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so when we talk about federal charges versus state charges, just in a general context, what's the difference between state charges when we hear someone's being tried criminally in state court like O.J. Simpson, or someone like Diddy that's being tried criminally in federal court, with these racketeering and trafficking charges?
So the simple answer is state laws versus federal laws, right? And sometimes the state, I practice in Florida, so sometimes the state will want to bring forth charges and sometimes the feds will. And another easy way to think of it is if someone is crossing through multiple state lines. So if there is, for instance, in this case involving sex trafficking, if you are moving or bringing people and traveling for the purpose of facilitating sex trafficking, that's what makes it federal. So state court, you think of just what's happening locally in your state. Federal court, when you're moving beyond to various states.
So there was an indictment that was published, or it was, it's public record.
Yeah.
So when we look at the indictment, I think this is a draft. This is one that's been circulated around the internet. And there are two main charges that I see. Obviously, the first one is the racketeering. And then the second one I see is a number way down. It's a count 2 for trafficking. Yeah. Sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. So let me ask you this. Let me start with the trafficking. So when we look at a sex trafficking count by force, I'll tell you, when I think of trafficking, I immediately go to the movie Taken. I don't, I just think of massage parlors and everything that happens in the news about them, federal stings on massage parlors for trafficking. But in this situation, it's a little different because you're dealing with a high-profile celebrity who seems to have been trafficking his own girlfriend, significant others, and other people he's come across.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a day in the life of a criminal defense attorney or a prosecutor, we don't deal with the movies. And I know that this is obviously, there's a lot going on here. We've got sex trafficking, racketeering. I know there's kidnapping, arson. And it goes back to what I said before, where he is they're accusing him of forcing or pressuring people to commit these sexual acts, and a lot of times he's facilitating the travel as well. So, and I know there was some kidnapping that's been involved too, but yes, it's not like the movies for sure. Definitely not like Taken, but Taken is a good example for you to think of when you're thinking of sex trafficking, but it doesn't have to be that crazy and that elaborate. It can be, simply facilitating the travel, and while you're doing that, you're forcing these horrendous sexual acts called the freak-offs. I'm sure that you've heard them refer to them as that, drug-induced, and then ultimately his team were the ones that were cleaning it up, and were forced to clean that up.
So when we have an indictment like this, obviously he was indicted and that's why he's on trial. But when we have a count that's fleshed out here by the U.S. attorney, Um, are the elements of the crime specified in the count? So everything that we're hearing about in the news with these witnesses, the salacious stories, the freak-offs, all this, threats and aggression by Diddy, is it also, it fits like puzzle pieces into the count of trafficking or the count of racketeering or transportation to engage in prostitution?
Yes. So the feds, they don't just, throw whatever and randomly put together an indictment. This comes from years and years of an investigation. And as you saw through the indictment is very elaborate. It goes through each of the elements first, and then it explains how Diddy did in fact commit those crimes and how they are going to prove and how they're going to be able to meet the elements to solidify a guilty verdict.
So there's also a charge of, or a count of racketeering. So does racketeering in any way relate to the sex trafficking allegations?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a lot of overlap in this indictment. And with the racketeering, I think the easiest way for people to think about it, like you said, the sex trafficking was taken, the racketeering would be like the mob, right? And so that would be an easy way for people to understand what's happening. Now, this is very different than the mob, but what happened is Diddy was using his, allegedly, of course, using his influence and using his team and using his empire to force people to do certain acts, and then also his team members were helping facilitate it and ultimately cover it up as well. So that's where the racketeering comes in. That's where the criminal organization comes in. So although it's not a mob and he's not, making money off of drugs or things like that, or going off and killing people, he's still using his enterprise to control people and ultimately have them engage and facilitate these illegal activities.
Well, they're certainly portraying him as a mob boss, as the big boss of the criminal enterprise, and I think they use the terminology criminal enterprise in the indictment. So I guess so that's certainly calculated.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I look at currently, the most recent witness was his assistant.
Yes.
And this is his former employee, this Capricorn Clark, who recently took the stand. And, this is a 55-year-old accomplished woman, who worked for other music moguls. And she was called by the prosecution, and it says that she's talking about threats about what Diddy said. If anything happened, he would have to kill me, she said. She described another time where she was subjected to 5 days of lie detector tests after 3 pieces of jewelry went missing. She was taken by one of Diddy's bodyguards to a locked, vacant Manhattan office each day where an unnamed man would administer these tests, and that if she failed, they're going to throw you into the East River. So I know it's wild, and you say it's not like movies, but when we see this and we see what the prosecution's being presenting, to the jury, when I see this testimony and what you're talking about with racketeering, is that where they're going with it? Like, hey, this was an enterprise. He was using threats, coercion, force, and aggression to carry out this whole elaborate scheme.
Yeah, even though, he doesn't seem like the typical mobster because of his background, that is certainly the picture that they're trying to portray. Is this criminal enterprise, this pressure, this coercion, these threats, guns being involved, kidnapping being involved, potential arson, even though they couldn't actually tie it to him because there wasn't a witness that actually saw him, with the destruction of the car. But he did say that he was going to do that according to the witnesses.
Right, and you have this witness, and they're rolling out witness after witness. The first witness called to the stand, I think, for 4 days was. I believe. Yeah. And the first one was this Cassie Ventura, who is ex-girlfriend. That's victim 1 in the indictment, if I'm not mistaken. And what the hell can the defense do to counteract all this other than maybe attacking credibility on cross-examination? But what are they going to do to rebut this? How can they get around this?
So what they have been doing thus far, of course, a typical tactic, just like what you said, is always attacking the witness's credibility. A lot of times they will dirty up the victim, right? Make the victim look bad, bring out things that they've done, show that they are a liar. But their whole theory has been that this was consensual, that there was never anything done without consent. They were in a committed long-term relationship, that there weren't these freak-offs, the way that people describe them. And also for Ms. Clark, the former assistant who then became an executive, for her, it's that she actually went back to her job for many years. She kept going back. So if someone is so horrific and threatening your life and kidnapping you and using a gun, why go back, right? So that is a very good strategy that I feel from the defense to attack Ms. Clark's credibility. And then they're saying, none of this ever happened. I think the video footage, video doesn't lie. So video footage is very hard to dispute. When there's been numerous videos put out there well before this indictment of him being abusive, physically abusive, and dragging the victim throughout the hallway. So that's certainly difficult to overcome. But I do know that Ms. Clark and Cassie were close. So also getting into attacking their relationship and how there's motive to lie. So those are some of the tactics that the defense team has utilized thus far. And it always goes down to making a victim look bad, dirtying up the victim, and attacking their credibility and their ability to testify truthfully.
And I think they employed the same tactic with the first witness, Cassie Ventura, that they were using the text messages like, hey, she kept coming back. But then it seemed what the U.S. attorney, what the prosecution did is they called that, I think it was a forensic psychologist or someone.
Yes, they did.
Who explained, hey, mentally, here's why you act this way. When you're a victim of trauma, you remember not every specific detail. You remember maybe sound bites, if you will, or something along the line. So that seems to be the game that's being played back and forth, that they're trying to rebut the defense's defense, essentially.
Yeah, I think that it's hard when you're not in that position. I've never had to go through that kind of trauma. I hope you've never had to go through that kind of trauma. I think it's really hard to understand why anyone in that situation would go back. So bringing in that expert was a phenomenal tactic to be able to explain that to a jury who is really going to victim shame. If this is so horrific, this is so terrible, you're being sex trafficked, who in the right mind would go back? And especially when the jurors tend to be more male, it's even harder for them to understand what women go through in terms of sex trauma. And I see it with my domestic violence victims all the time. It's called the battered spouse syndrome. And because I represent victims as well. And I've seen how they go back time and time and time again, hoping, praying that something will be different for whatever reason, whatever history they have from their past that makes them feel that they need to go back until there's finally the straw that broke the camel's back, and that's when they leave. But it normally takes sometimes years and years of dealing with the abuse, of hoping that it will be better. So it's a difficult concept to understand for victims of domestic violence and sexual violence. But unfortunately, that's the reality what a lot of women have to face.
Yeah, I mean, my 2 cents, I'm not a criminal defense lawyer. Obviously, I represent victims as well, in the civil context. But if you're the prosecution, you're rolling out witness after witness after witness with these crazy stories. I mean, we didn't even get into Kid Cudi, about what Diddy was doing to him. So is it possible every witness was either lying or had a bias or has credibility issues or was consensual? I think it's going to be really, really difficult, and hopefully they did a good job in jury selection. But I think it's a tough hill to climb here, just with all the witnesses that they're rolling out. Especially, federal prosecutors don't mess around.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the defense definitely has their work cut out for them, and they've made certain strides based on the typical attacking the credibility, but there are a lot of witnesses, there's video footage, and that is certainly very hard to overcome.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, look, we got to hear from you again. In particular, I was thinking around closing arguments. I mean, that's always the pinnacle of a trial and what everyone looks forward to, whether you're a lawyer or not. So it'll be interesting to see the way this plays out. But hey, let me ask, Kristen, where, if victims need to find you? You mentioned domestic violence victims. Obviously, you're the lawyer down here in Florida, but what's the best place to reach you?
So you can go to my website, jackwinlegal.com. I'm also on Facebook if you want to reach me on social media, Kristen Reynoso Jackwin. So if you Google Jackwin Legal PA, you will be able to find me. My email is kristen@jackwinlegal.com. I live, sleep, dream the law, so I'm frequently checking my email, but I'm happy to help in any capacity that I can. I represent victims of domestic violence, victims of sexual violence, victims of all sorts of financial issues, a little different than what we're discussing today, but it is definitely a passion of mine, representing victims as young as 8 years old for sexual violence. So definitely a big part of my practice that I thoroughly enjoy doing.
Well, Kristen Jackwin, appreciate the time. We'll talk to you later, all right?
Thank you so much, Brandon. It's been a pleasure.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on the Victims Advocate podcast with Brandon Stein, and we'll see you on the next one. Be sure to follow us on Instagram @The Victim Advocate, on YouTube @The Victims Advocate, and visit our website at victimadvocate.com.